In January, a group of British farmers didn't write a letter. They didn't sign a petition. They drove their tractors straight to a Tesco depot and blocked it. That's not a metaphor. That actually happened. And it wasn't random anger. It was years of pressure finally breaking through. Jeremy Clarkson has been saying this was coming for years, not as a TV personality doing a bit, as a working farmer who watched, up close, what happens when the biggest retailer in the country holds all the leverage over the people who grow the food. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what's going on, why farmers are furious, why Clarkson keeps saying it out loud when most people in his position would stay quiet, and why the thing that's happening at Tesco isn't really about one supermarket at all. Because once you understand the mechanics of it, you'll never look at a Tesco shelf the same way again. Let's start with the number that explains almost everything. A ton of wheat right now is going for around £170. A ton of fertilizer is well over £400. A tractor that would have cost a fraction of that a decade ago is now pushing £150,000. Farmers are paying industrial-era costs and getting paid supermarket-era prices for what they grow. That gap doesn't close itself. Somebody eats it. And it's rarely Tesco. Here's the part that makes it personal instead of abstract. Clarkson didn't learn this from a spreadsheet. He learned it running his own farm shop in Oxfordshire, watching what happens when you try to sell food outside the supermarket system. He's talked about restocking after a sellout weekend, running out of honey within hours, having to relabel chard as spinach just so people would recognize it. Small stuff. But it taught him something most shoppers never see. Selling food honestly, at a price that actually covers the cost of growing it, is genuinely hard, and supermarkets have spent decades making it harder. His solution, the one he's floated publicly more than once, is almost defiantly simple. Strip back the bureaucracy strangling farmers and force supermarkets to sell what's actually in season and grown nearby, instead of whatever's cheapest to import. Not a policy paper. A gut reaction from someone who's lived both sides of the transaction. Walk into a Tesco today and look at what's changed. Own-label products have crept into more and more of the shelf. Familiar brands get squeezed toward the edges. Sound familiar? It's the same math everywhere. When Tesco sells its own product, it controls the margin end to end. When it sells someone else's, it doesn't. Multiply that decision across thousands of stores, and you get a supply chain where the grower is the last person consulted and the first person to absorb a bad year. That's the thread connecting the farm and the shelf. It's the same squeeze, just applied at different points in the chain. And then there's the self-checkout aisle, which by now everyone has an opinion about. One staff member, 6 machines, a queue of people scanning their own shopping and bagging it themselves. Convenient, sure. But ask yourself honestly, has any of that saved labor actually shown up as a lower price? Most shoppers, when they stop and think about it, say no. The work moved. The receipt didn't move with it. Put those two things side by side. Farmers getting squeezed at the entry point of the supply chain. Shoppers doing more of the work at the exit point. Tesco sits in the middle, and the middle is where the profit accumulates. This is the part that made the January protest inevitable rather than surprising. It wasn't only about wheat prices or fertilizer costs, real as those are. It was also about proposed changes to inheritance tax that farmers say could break up family farms that have existed for generations. Organizers were blunt about it. This is about protecting the food Britain actually depends on, not just squeezing another margin point out of an industry that's already stretched thin. Clarkson has been unusually direct about where his sympathy sits in that fight. He said plainly that he doesn't think there's a farmer left who feels represented by the political mainstream anymore. That's not a small thing for someone with his reach to say. It's the sound of a very public person deciding that staying diplomatically quiet isn't worth it anymore. So when people say Clarkson is fed up, this is what that actually means. It's not a tantrum about a receipt. It's a working farmer with a very large microphone watching the same squeeze play out year after year on the wheat, on the fertilizer, on the tractor loan, on the shelf space, and deciding he's not going to pretend it's fine anymore. Here's the uncomfortable part for Tesco, and for supermarkets generally. None of this is a fringe complaint. Criticism of how Tesco treats suppliers goes back decades. Smaller producers pushed out, disputes over fair pricing, accusations that go all the way to Parliament committees. This isn't a new pattern. It's an old pattern that finally has a famous enough voice, repeating it loudly enough that people outside farming are starting to listen. And that's really the shift worth paying attention to. For years, this was a conversation happening inside agricultural trade publications that most shoppers never read. Now it's happening on primetime television and in national newspaper columns. From someone who built an entire second career on making inaccessible technical subjects feel urgent and personal. So step back and look at the whole picture. A tractor blockade at a Tesco depot. A farmer turned broadcaster saying plainly that the system is failing the people who grow the food. Shelves quietly reorganized to favor the retailer's own margin over the grower's survival. Checkout lanes where the customer does more work for the same price. None of these are separate stories. They're the same story, told from 4 different points in the chain. Tesco isn't collapsing. It remains one of the most dominant retailers in the country. But dominance and trust aren't the same thing, and right now a lot of people who feed this country, and a lot of people who shop there every week, are starting to ask the same question out loud. Who is this system actually built for anymore? Clarkson didn't invent that question. He just refused to stay quiet about it. If you've noticed any of this yourself, drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know whether it's the shelf, the checkout, or the farms that got your attention first.